And there we are. Hello everyone, welcome back inside Wagner Vineyards for another Friday virtual tasting. Joined by John Pulos.
Hi. Hi, how are you?
And joined by all of you, of course. So let us know what you're drinking tonight. Let us know where you're watching from. We'll give you a shout out. We have a packed schedule for this next hour plus, perhaps. We'll see. As you can see, I'm sure, a lot of wines. We're not going to drink all of these wines, but we're going to at least briefly touch.
Can they see all those bottles?
Oh, yeah. They can see quite a few of them.
Okay.
We'll touch on really all of them in some way or another, because one of the topics we're going to talk about today is bottle shape as well as bottle closure. And, you know, there's a mix of all the different ones here, so we'll get to those. But I'll turn the floor over to you, Mr. Pulos, because I know we still want to talk a little bit about two wines, two varietals in particular.
Now,
yes,
I'm probably 50, 60 years older than you. You can call me John.
John.
You can call me John. Thank you. All right.
Mr. P.
Whatever.
It takes you back to the teaching days?
Whatever. So, I want to do a little housekeeping first, if we could do that.
Yep.
You and I haven't discussed this, but I think it's, in my mind, it's worth discussing.
Okay.
I had a really wonderful relationship with Ann, our winemaker of 36 years. I've known Kevin since he was a baby when his mother brought him in my restaurant, and I've developed a nice relationship with Jess. Okay. And when we talk about making great wine, every winemaker says it starts with grapefruit.
Okay.
Not grapefruit that you have for breakfast, but great is in big or nice fruit. And I can't start or do anything here without talking about the piece you did last week with John Wagner.
That was a great one.
John always likes me to temper everything. When I say we're the best or this is the best wine, he says, you know, we got a lot of competition, and we do. We have great wineries in this region. But when we were named Winery of the Year and our Riesling was named Best Dry, Best Overall, Best White Wine in New York, the 64 best wine in the world, then I can say what I want, because it is. If there's anyone out there that knows any more about growing grapes than John Wagner, I'd like them to step up here.
Yeah.
Because that piece you did last week with him, and him holding the Cabernet Franc shoot and explaining it, was amazing. And so I just wanted to say, our winemakers always tell me it starts with the best fruit in the region. And that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about our fruit.
The result of that. And if you missed last Friday, and last Friday was a gorgeous day, and it was one of the first gorgeous Fridays we'd had really all year. So I understand if you were out and about and not glued to your Facebook Live, but you can go back and watch that as well. Very interesting discussion about planting our new 10-acre Cabernet Franc site.
And if you get really, really hot someday, like we've had these 90-degree days, and you want to cool off, you can go back 3 weeks before that in early May and watch you and John with 2 inches of snow on you.
Yes, at least
at least 2 inches of snow. All right. I want to start. Now, what we've done is when we've done a lot of talk about Riesling. When you and John have talked, it's been about Riesling. When you and I sat the first time, we did the Bordeaux, Cabernet Franc, Sauvignon, Merlot, and the Meritage.
Yep.
When we did the Titanic a month ago, we did Chardonnay and we did Sparkling.
Yes.
And there's a couple we haven't touched on, and we need to touch on them to talk about the bottles that we put them in.
Yeah, and we need to talk about them before we open up, and this series, you know, becomes a little less frequent. So,
yes.
Yes.
So I want to start with Pinot Noir. We're using the little glass for the Pinot tonight?
No,
the big glass?
The red glass.
Notice, if you can see this, how much lighter it is than a Bordeaux. And we'll talk about that in a second. Cabernet Franc, 1602, introduced, I told you, by Cardinal Richelieu. Sauvignon was first seen in the late 1600s, Merlot in the late 1700s. Those are new grapes. Pinot Noir is one of the 3 oldest grapes on the face of the earth. Gouais Blanc and a grape spelled Saganin are the other 2. They're 3 ancient grapes. Pinot is one of the 3 oldest grapes in the world. There are historians that think if Christ changed water into wine at the wedding of Cana, it was Pinot Noir. How did it get to France?
What a great vintage that must have been.
Yes. How did it get to France? In 50 BC, The Romans attacked the Gauls and added France to their empire. And the Romans had this habit, along with the monks that we talked about, of planting something on conquered soil. And many feel they planted the Pinot grape in what is today the Burgundy region of France. You go into a liquor store, go to the front section, and you'll see many bottles labeled Bordeaux. Then you go down a little bit and you see bottles labeled Burgundy. That's Pinot Noir.
Or
Pinot
Bourguignon,
Noir.
yeah.
Yes, or yes, but that's Pinot Noir. Thinner skins, lighter tannins. You can see this, the color of this is much lighter than a Bordeaux, and that's what you expect in a Pinot. Let me have a sip here. This is the Grace House. This is what we have available now. Our reserve is probably 2 or 3 years down the road. But that's a really nice Pinot. Pinot grows in really tight clusters. They look like pine cones. Pinot in France means pine cone. Noir is black. The black pine cone is what it was known as. So that's the first one we're going to talk about, the Pinot Noir. Now, and we'll talk about the bottle of the Pinot in a few minutes. The other one that we haven't touched on is Gewürztraminer.
Yes.
Now, when we talked about excuse us, we have to pour the wine. When we talked about the Bordeaux wines, and I told you that in the late 1600s, Cabernet Franc cross-pollinated with Sauvignon Blanc. That's a DNA test. That's done at the University of California, Davis. It happened. Merlot, if we remember, we talked about it, has 5 DNA signatures. There are some grapes that they can break down the DNA and they can tell where it originated, where it's from. They know that Pinot's over 2,000 years old and tracing it back. Gewürztraminer is not one of those grapes that they can trace exactly. And there's 2 theories for Gewürztraminer. Gewürzt means spice. Tramine is a village in a region known as South Tyrol, which used to be part of Austria, German speaking. And there is a group of grapes that you've never heard of, a list of 8 or 9 grapes that are called Tramine or Traminer grapes. And the old grape, Savagnin, is one of those grapes. Now, we've talked about grapes being moved by monks and by the Romans. Somehow, the grape, there's 2 theories, the grape Traminer variety got moved into France, into the Alsace region of France.
Right on the border of
Yes,
Germany.
and it could have mutated into Gewürztraminer because part of Gewürztraminer's DNA is some of the Tramine grapes. But there's another theory that it was brought there, and it was brought there and started there, and then there's other scientists or specialists that think that Gewürztraminer really started in South Tyrol and Tramine. I've always said, from what I've read, it mutated in Alsace and was brought back to Germany, into German grounds. It doesn't matter. That's its background. Now, Gewürztraminer is a different tasting grape.
It can be one of those wines, if you've had it enough, you either love it or you hate it.
If you drink bourbon and you switch to Scotch,
Right.
there's a huge difference. If you're a tea drinker and then start drinking coffee, it's a huge difference. If you drink Pepsi and then drink Dr. Pepper, it's a huge difference. Riesling is fruity, Chardonnay is fruity, Sauvignon Blanc is fruity, this is spicy, and it's floral.
Yes.
And that's the huge difference with drinking this. And ours are excellent. This is an excellent Gewürztraminer.
We're drinking the dry Gewürztraminer. We have a semi-dry as well, and we
Yes.
also blend it with Riesling for our Fathom.
For the Fathom, which is a whole nother show someday, maybe. Okay. All right. So I very briefly, and I've got stories that could tie us up for a couple hours, but I very
New batteries in the microphones.
Yes.
We got.
Well, we don't. Okay. So what we're going to do now is talk about how they are bottled.
Right.
I just told you that Pinot is from the Burgundy region of France.
Mm-hmm.
Think back to our discussion of Chardonnay.
Mm-hmm.
Chardonnay's DNA is Pinot Noir and the other old grape, Gouais Blanc.
Interesting.
Which is also part of Riesling, as a matter of fact. So this is a Burgundy grape, Pinot. And Chardonnay is a Burgundy grape. Oh, notice the bottles are very similar. The Burgundy bottle.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at the time in the middle 1800s, bottles trace back to the 15 and 1600s, blown bottles. But the issue with bottles in those days was they weren't uniform. And there was an issue in how to close them, which we'll talk about later when we talk about closures. But they weren't uniform. And into the early 1800s, the glass blowing techniques got a whole lot better. Now, during this period, the Bordeaux dominated the world wines. The French Bordeaux's were consumed by French kings, and they were very popular all over Europe. But jumping the gun were the winemakers in the Burgundy region. And they came out in the early 1800s with the first uniform bottle.
Interesting.
And the easiest blown bottle in those days was the slope shoulders. So they came out with the first bottle, first uniform bottle across a region. The winemakers in the Bordeaux were not happy because they considered themselves the finest winemakers in the world, and they got beat out. So within a 2-year period, again after the Burgundy bottles, the Bordeaux came out with their bottle.
It does strike me as interesting that it's kind of a race to be uniform. You know, I think part of what makes wine drinking maybe so inaccessible to somebody who's not used to it, especially old world wine, is that they all look the same. The bottles are all the same from Bordeaux, and there's just a bunch of, you know, all this different writing on it. You don't even know what grape it is and things like that. So it's interesting that they took pride in that and, you know, offered now to have a very uniform look.
So they came out with a bottle that turned out to be a little harder to blow, but it had shoulders. Where the slope here, the Bordeaux bottles have shoulders. Now, most wine regions in the United States, the older ones, have adopted these European bottle styles. But not every wine region has.
Sure.
I did a wine show in Texas a couple years ago called The Grapevine. They had 275,000 people pass through the place. It's the largest wine show in the country. And Wagner's was part of the show. And the Wagners flew me down. And during the time we were there, we got to visit Texas wineries. Now, Texas, as I believe, is now number 3 or 4 in the country in wine production.
Yep.
And we visited some of the top wineries in Texas, and all their bottles were the same. Every single, the labels, of course, were a little bit different.
Right.
All their bottles were the same. And
they were Bordeaux, or they were
they could have, I don't remember.
Yeah,
I think they were more Bordeaux with the shoulders.
Sure.
But they were all the Rieslings, and the Rieslings in Texas are not good, and the Gewürztraminers in Texas are not good because it's just too warm.
Right.
But their reds were excellent, and they had some nice wine there. So this was the second type of bottle, and it had shoulders. Many think, and we talked about this during our Titanic talk, about the sediments. The filtering wasn't great in those days, and most wine, red wine, had to be decanted
Right.
to get the sediments out and open the wine up a little bit. And they feel these shoulders were used as you poured the wine out, it would catch some of the sediment. So that's the Bordeaux bottle. And you get a classic Bordeaux, and our Meritage is a little bit bigger than that, but it has the shoulders, and that's the Bordeaux bottle.
It's also, speaking as someone who owns a wine fridge, a lot easier to store bottles with shoulders than it is when you get to these ones that can get pretty wide.
Okay. So, what about Riesling and Gewürztraminer?
What about it?
What about it?
Got to do something to stand out, right?
Here is a Riesling that we've spent months talking about, and here is Gewürztraminer. Oh, notice they're exactly alike. Let me get rid of our Bordeaux here. Now, the official name of that bottle is the Alsace-Moselle bottle.
Two
the Alsace,
regions that make quite a bit of both of those.
They make a lot of Gewürztraminer in the Alsace. The two best Gewürztraminer areas considered in the world are the Alsace, where the grape may have come from, and South Tyrol and Tremine, which is now part of Italy.
That's a whole nother story.
The Italians were late getting into World War I, and the Allies told the Italians, you guys get in and we win, we'll give you South Tyrol. So if you look at the Italian boot, the upper east part is now the German-speaking province of South Tyrol. And that's been there since, and so their Gewürztraminer is still considered some of the best in the world. Now, Bordeaux, very, very famous. Burgundies, very, very famous. And they did a lot of traveling up and down the coast from England to northern Africa in ships. And they had to be sturdy in ships because they were put in the bottom and they got jostled around. And these are sturdy bottles. Well, Riesling and Gewürztraminer from Alsace and the Moselle, this way on a map, travel on a river. They traveled the Rhine. The Rhine connected this whole region. Riverboats weren't nearly as big as ocean liners, and they had limited storage in the front of the boat. So they blew the bottles much taller because they could get them in the boxes and store more. That's the shape. That's where the shape of that came from.
Wow.
So you see a tall, thin bottle like that. That's why. That's a Alsace Moselle bottle. So those are the three shapes of the bottles. And let me see. Check my notes here. Make sure. Okay, I haven't left anything out. Now, the other interesting part about this. Which bottle was it? Was it the Pinot bottle? I think.
Punts?
Yes. Let me put this back in for a second. I guess we're not going to get it back in. Don't worry about it. All right. So one of the interesting things, the trial and error method of blowing bottles long ago, and I'm assuming many of you have seen glass blowing. You may have been to Corning. Glass was blown on long, long tubes called pontils, P-O-N-T-I-L. And they wore gloves. Their lips would be red, and at the bottom of this 6-foot pontel would be a ball of glass. And they would spin it, and they would blow it, and then the bottom of the bottle would be connected to the pontel. And they would cut it off, and it would, dry it out and cool it off, and then in many cases there'd be a little bump on the bottom. And the little bump did a couple things. If you read the history of this, scratched people's tables.
Yes.
And wasn't steady because it wasn't flat on the bottom. So they began then punching in the pontel, and it was called a punt. And the punt then prevented the bottle from rocking and scratching tables. Well, what they found over the years now was the sediment would gather around the punt, and when you poured the wine, you would get less sediment out. So what they began doing was make, and you can see them today in some bottles, much deeper punts. And that's where that came from. Now, the interesting part about that is you still see that our Pinot Reserve bottle has a very deep, the tall one, very deep punt. They're useless today.
Yeah.
They're useless. They do nothing.
Right.
The filtering is so good, they do nothing.
There is a myth that, well, it means it's a finer style of wine the deeper the punt goes. That's not always the case, and by no means can you just buy bottles with deep punts and then all of a sudden now think you get a larger markup on your wine.
What you may wonder is if you get 750 milliliters of wine, if the punt is real deep, you don't know how much you're really getting.
That's fair as well.
That's fair too. Okay, and color. Dark green usually, dark amber usually, those bottles. And that reason is if the bottles are clear and they get a lot of light, they oxidizes the wine inside. And so that's why the dark bottles. Miller beer is an example. It's always had a clear bottle, and it if you leave it in the sun or something, but they've stayed with that for years and years. But that's why bottles have darker colors. Normally green is to protect them from sunlight. So that's the bottling part. Anybody have any questions about the bottles?
If you do have questions, start to get those in. I'll give a shout out that we have people watching from really all over the country, which is great. Barbara from New Hampshire loves the wines. Excellent to hear, Barbara. Dean and Maryland from Pennsylvania. Linda from Fremont, Ohio. Erica says, hi, John. Expect a distant visit from you soon. Oliver wants to see his Gramps. So
Okay.
obviously, you know what that means.
Hello, Oliver.
David watching from Los Angeles, which is great to see. Bernadette in Saratoga drinking the 2016 Meritage. Phenomenal wine to be drinking today. Hopefully you got something really good to pair with it. And then Jen from Telford, Pennsylvania as well. So a lot of different places checking in. Rich also from Greeners in Red Lion, PA. They miss Wagner's as well. We're getting close. Getting close.
Hopefully in 2 weeks.
Hopefully 2 weeks. Paul asked why the difference in colors, and you kind of just mentioned though, at least versus white versus
it's
dark.
a wine region too. The Bordeaux and the Burgundy really like the dark green, and some winemakers just like different, a darker color, but it has to be a darker color to protect it from the light.
Right.
Okay. Now the only thing I haven't mentioned is sizes. And I've got to refer to my notes here. There's a bottle called, and it's if you've ever seen the little splits, they're called piccolos. Piccolos. Piccolo, and they're about 25 milliliters, and those are the splits. And then we have the demis, which is our ice wine.
Keep going.
Okay. Which is, if you know the shape of an ice wine bottle that Alex is running over to get now, and they're 375 milliliters, and they're called demis. Standard bottle, which most of you buy, are
350 right there.
That's 350, are 750 milliliters. And the Magnum, which is double, is 1,500 milliliters. And then there's one called Jeroboam.
Jeroboam.
You've heard of that?
Yep, Jeroboam.
Okay. And that's a double Magnum.
So twice the size of that.
So that you'll need a cart to get out of here. And
they go up even bigger too, into just crazy sizes.
Okay. So we'll finish with this segment by talking about a champagne or sparkling bottle. Now,
trying to play a game here. How much wine can we fit on the table without it buckling?
And maybe I want to hide myself. If my friend Leah is watching from Rochester, she's probably said from the beginning, when are you going to get your hair cut? Well, when we first did this on April 3rd, I had just had, where the hell did you get your hair cut?
My wife.
Oh, your wife
did my haircut.
All right.
Vanessa did a wonderful job.
Well, yes, she did. It looked like you've been to the studio already. So I haven't had mine cut in a couple months. And Leah's the one that normally tells me to get your hair cut, but I haven't seen it.
The top's not too long.
No, the top is fine, but the top has been good since college.
Gotcha.
I lost my hair early. Anyway, let's talk about sparkling, and we talked about this when we did our Titanic presentation. Sparkling wine dates back to before 1600. And the monks, again,
Gotta give a lot of credit to the
were
monks.
bottling wine early. It was a mistake before it finished fermenting. And the bottles then weren't so good that we're going to talk about closures in a minute, that it blew out the closures. The bottles wouldn't explode because it would come out of the closures. That's why you see the netting and on a champagne bottle prevent it from blowing out. In 1662, a gentleman named Christopher Merritt in England began adding a little yeast and a little sugar to a bottle of wine and created the first bubbly. And 6 years later is when the monk, he was a monk, Dom Perignon, began experimenting with this. And he actually experimented with several wines. We did talk about champagne during the Titanic. That's a combination of 3 wines. A Blanc de Blanc is one. But what they found, the French were not able to make this, and they weren't able to develop a bottle to hold it. The pressure here is 90. That's 3 times what an automobile tire is. And if you let a cork pop, they go up to 30 miles an hour.
Yes,
So
very dangerous.
It's 90 psi.
Always have a dish towel covering
Yes.
it. Don't try a saberage if you don't know how to do it.
So
just general disclaimers.
that's why the bottle is much heavier,
Yes.
is because they blow up. And sometimes in the racks, when they're riddling them and when they're turning them and when that's developing, is they blow up and take a whole rack with them. So the bottles were developed in England. They were developed in England in the late early 1700s. Is when they began bottling sparkling wine. So that's the 4th kind of bottle, and that's a pretty standard bottle for champagne. And I think we did talk, the next time you open a bottle of champagne, you'll notice the collar has a rim on it. And when they are first bottled and the yeast and the sugar are added, a crown or a Coca-Cola cap are added to the top, and then they're turned on their side and they're rotated. Ours goes for about a year, but they can go 7 to 8 years in aging, and the longer they go, the more expensive they are. Okay.
Yeah. Fun note too about the wiring: it is always 6 turns. No matter, there are always 6 turns to open.
That I
one of those
didn't know.
tops.
Thank you, Alex, for educating.
It's happened. It only took close to 3 months.
Okay.
A couple just quick comments that I want to get to. Michael, who says he's right next door. Well, cheers, Michael. Hopefully you can come check us out again pretty soon. Trey from Belafonte, PA. A lot of Pennsylvania listeners, watchers. That's great to see. GB says her husband has to get a U-Haul ready for when they come out here, which is great to hear. Richard says size always matters. Well, the Riesling Ice is pretty delicious as well, in just at $3.50. And let's see who else we got here. Trey needs a Jeroboam right about now. I can hear you on that. It's a very good Friday. It's the right kind of size for a Friday night out on the porch. And Jennifer from Troy checking in as well. That Wagner is one of their great stops. So, and GB says John Pulos is one of the many gems of Wagner Vineyards.
Who said that?
GB Amanda, who's been watching this show for, I would say, pretty much since day one. So,
thank you for
checking in.
watching.
Yeah.
And not, it is cloudy here. I don't know how it is there. But after maybe the worst April in memory, and I have many more memories than you do, the last couple of weeks have been fabulous.
They've been excellent.
They've been fabulous. Okay, now we have to close. They're called closures. We have to close these bottles. And as I mentioned when we began talking about this, they didn't really start developing a uniform neck until the 1700s. And before that, they were closing with glass. Now, glass meaning they would make a cone type thing and just drop it in.
Yeah.
So they weren't protecting the wine at all.
Right.
They use leather, they use cloth, they use wax, they used anything to jam into the bottle. So if you didn't drink it right away, it wasn't going to last very long.
Quick side note, wax is a pain. I've had some really good wines from wax, and it looks great, but it is a pain to get off. Sorry, as you were.
But it's still corked, right?
Yes. Oh,
It's
yeah,
corked.
yeah. It's not just
Yeah,
wax.
but they
you do all that work, and then you still have to just pull the cork out.
You still have to pull the cork out. And that's, there's, anyway.
Anything to stand out, I guess.
So the first real closure that was consistent was corks. And in Spain and Portugal, and that part of the world, Spain and Portugal have probably 55 to 58% of all the corked oak trees. They're considered an oak tree. And they date 60 million years ago.
Wow.
60 million years. And when you plant one, it's a family business. When you plant one, it takes 20 years before it's ready. And what they do is they strip the bark off these trees, and it can be this thick. And they actually strip them off, a whole forest of these trees, and the tree survives, and it takes 10 years for the bark to grow back. And a tree lasts about 200 years. So every decade for 200 years, you're getting bark. You're harvesting bark. And then what they did, now cork goes way back even before bottling. The fishermen in the Bible used cork to keep their nets afloat. So cork has been used, but it wasn't used for bottles until they got a uniform size. So what they do with cork is they have to dry it first, and they have to dry it on very dry, flat cement floors, and they let it sit for 6 to 8 months sometimes. Once it's dried, then they boil it, and it softens it, gets it wet again, of course, but they're trying to sterilize the cork. And there's a chemical in the cork that can, TC, that can cause some things that we're going to talk about in a second. So then they punch the cork, full cork out. And then they have someone boil it again the second time. But a solid cork, you can boil it, but you're not getting what's inside the cork. It doesn't penetrate. And then they have crews that go through, this is mostly done in Europe, that grade the corks, high grade and low grade. And then they're sold as high grade, low grade, natural corks, 100% cork to wineries. And the rest of it is ground up, and it's, I have struggled with words I'm not familiar with. It's agglomerated or agglomerated, AGGLOMERATED. They would grind that up and glue it together to make corks. And what's happened in Europe to this day, that wineries that use natural corks, and the traditional old time, been there for a million years, and the father, the grandfather, the great-grandfather passed down, close this winery up if you don't use real corks or something.
Right.
So as many as one bottle out of 2 cases can be corked. When I was in Texas, a local wine aficionado that went with us, he was representing Glenora, and one of the Texas wineries opened a lot of bottles for us, and he immediately said, that's corked. And that's the first time I'd heard this. This is 4 or 5 years ago. The only way I can explain it, and I didn't taste it, is imagine you have a damp basement. And many people do, very damp basement, and you lick the floor.
Don't try this at home.
No.
Imagine.
That's
Keep it in your head.
That's what a corked wine is supposedly tastes like. And a really good wine drinker, meaning drinking a lot of really high-end wines, they estimate will open 100 cork bottles in their lifetime.
Wow.
So that's 1 out of every 24 bottles. Now, let's go to the 1970s.
And bear in mind, we're talking now, when we talk about that, that's only the true natural cork.
Yes, 100% cork.
It's important to remember that when we talk later on about the cork that we use.
So the 1970s, early 1970s, cork-heeled shoes were the rage. Meaning they were thick, they came up like here, especially in women's shoes, they came down. Cork had been used for sandals by the Egyptians and the Greeks back in their heyday. But again in the 70s, corked shoes became the rage.
Okay.
So a lot of the
Fashion's cyclical, it's coming back at some point.
So a lot of this good cork was diverted to shoe companies who were paying more for it than the corking ones. So there was a shortage of cork. And the best corks got sent to the great European wineries. And the evolving wineries in Australia and New Zealand got the crap corks, got the second grade, low grade corks. And they were finding sometimes half of their bottles were tainted, cork tainted. So they held in the middle 1970s, first Australia and then New Zealand, a cork summit. It was called a cork summit. And they discussed, what are we going to do about this? And they decided to use screw caps for the first time. And they began screw capping their wines.
They couldn't call it the Cork Summit anymore. Had to change the t-shirts.
And right now, and it was an evolution, 99% of all wineries in New Zealand and Australia are 100% screw caps. So we're going to talk about why and talk about our corkage. There is a company, DIAM, is that what it is? DIAM. That is maybe now, and there's a little logo here, the leading cork manufacturer in the world right now. And they developed a process about 15 years ago where they buy the cork after it's all done and they grind it all up. They don't even punch out natural corks. And they have a special process they developed using CO2 to sterilize all of these little pieces. And it is, they borrowed this process from making decaf coffee.
Interesting.
It backs into the decaf coffee. And so every little piece is sterilized. And then they form the shape of the cork with a special type of glue that is food-based glue. And then I watched the video, and then they have machines that shave them so they're uniform size. And if you order them, you know, individually, they'll put your logo on them. And that's what we use. And that's the leading cork in the industry right now, are these Dion corks. They make more than anyone else.
And what I like about them, what they don't do compared to other places you can tell where they get their corks, is put the year on the top. And I learned the reason why some places do that is so that you have to buy new ones every single year.
Oh, that's right.
Because then you have the wrong vintage.
You have the wrong one.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, they don't do that.
Right.
I mean, they put a year on it if you want it, I guess, if they're putting their name on it. But they don't do that. So we use these corks for our reds and for our barreled Chardonnays and our ice wines. And a few years ago, and John talked about this in one of your sessions, we went to screw caps. And they're called Stelvins, S-T-E-L-V-I-N. But Stelvin is the name of a company.
Right.
Give me a Kleenex.
Right. Or a Band-Aid.
Or a Band-Aid.
Yeah.
Or Scotch tape. Or go Xerox this for me. Those are the names of companies.
Right.
But you want a copy, You want to, want something to cover your wound.
Yeah.
And so this is called a Stelvin, but there are other people that make these.
Yeah.
But they're the #1 company in the world now that make these Stelvins. Now, you got any questions before I get into the air and the wine?
There is one question. I'll just get to it real quick from Rich, asking any new wines forthcoming from Wagner's, new varieties and things like that. Something we talked about last week with John and Cabernet Franc. Our new plantings there are going to have 5 clones. Right now, we only had 2 clones on the farm, so we're going to have a lot of different types of clones of Cab Franc, and I think what that will lead to, you might see our Cab Franc suite of wines expand. But in terms of actual, new varieties that we might be planning, John's is very bullish on Riesling and Cabernet Franc and making sure, that we're going to produce at the levels that we know that those are capable of. So that's our focus right now.
Okay.
As you were.
Okay. So, again, we have 2 schools of thought. I love the word expert. So it's been a favorite word of mine. You write a book about something, you're an expert.
You're an expert.
And the guy down the road writes a book about it, the same thing, and has a whole different ending. He's an expert. So there are experts that don't agree. The school of thought for many, many years is that a cork will allow a little oxygen in the bottle every year. Not much, a very small percentage. And what this does is it shapes and softens the tannins and molds the wine as it ages. They've been thinking this for years. There was a great restaurant in Elmira for years called Pierce's. Pierce's 1894. It was a nationally famous restaurant. He had a wine cellar with 10,000 bottles of wine. And in a cage, he had his best. And I had a very good friend from Kingston, Ontario, Canada, that owned one of the top restaurants in all of Canada. And we became very good friends. And he came to visit once with his 3 kids. So my kids and his kids stayed home with pizza, and we went to Pierce's, and I introduced them to the owner. And he took us into the basement and to the cage. And my friend from Canada noticed in the cage a bottle of red wine. I'm not sure what it was. I didn't drink red wine then. I drank a lot of gin back in those days. And he noticed the bottle, and it was bottled in 1944 during World War II, a German bottle that was bottled. And he asked to see it. And Joe went in and got it, and he came out, and he looked at it, and he said, I want it. And he asked Joe how much it was. And he says it's $250. And he goes, I want it. Now, I thought he was going to take it back to Canada with him. But he opened it at the table.
Oh.
So Joe and his 2 wine stewards and the sommelier gathered around as they took the cork out of this bottle. They wanted to see. They wanted to see what the cork came out solid. The bottle was under climate control, and it came out solid. And the wine wasn't corked. I said, you're wasting it on me. I don't know red wine. Now I would have loved to have tasted it. But the bottle stood up this was probably, it was quite a few years ago. So it was a 40-year-old bottle of wine. And point is, if you keep it under proper conditions, you can keep a bottle of red wine for a very long time. Now, was oxygen getting in there? That's where the experts disagree. When you bottle wine with our machine, a little bit of oxygen gets in it. Ann told me this. You can't avoid it. And there are many that think that little bit of oxygen will sometimes multiply and age on its own. Not everyone thinks that way, but there are some that do.
Some experts.
What we know for sure is, we think, is that oxygen in a white wine that gets in will change the fruit flavors in the wine over time. Now, white wines we know don't last nearly as long as red wines, and we have here every July the Alta B weekend, where we bring out older wines for our Taste Club members to taste. And what I've noticed over the years is, although it's very drinkable, older Gewürztraminers change drastically. Taste to me more like Rieslings and lose their pepper and lose their spicy and floral nature. But that again, so John decided that he was going to go to Stelvin's. I'm not sure how many years ago it was, 6, 7, 8, he mentioned it once. He was going to go to the Stelvin enclosure to make our whites, especially our Rieslings, stay fruitier longer. Now, there's a special machine. These are more money to bottle than a cork.
Important to reiterate that again, because obviously, you know, the phrase screw top, it comes with a connotation that it's a lesser wine. Not the case, certainly financially, and there's a reason why we do it.
When I was young, and that's a long time ago, there were wines, Boone's Farm,
Sure.
Thunderbird, Four Roses maybe, dollar bottles of wine. And they were the only wines with screw caps.
$2 Chuck for everyone in my age range. Okay.
And they had screw caps.
Yeah.
So for years, and this is recently,
Right.
if you went into a liquor store and you see Rieslings, nice tall Rieslings, and one's got a screw cap and one's got a cork, people are grabbing the corked ones first because they think that's a cheaper wine. They're slowly being educated.
Sure.
We were one of the first to do it. And these Stelvins were developed in many cases to keep the oxygen out. Now, they're applied by the machine over the bottle, and then this is spun and it gets the grooves in the bottle. So, let me see if I can do this without cutting myself. Let me get my glasses on.
The knives are out, ladies and gentlemen.
The knives are out.
Extra careful.
The old guy dropped it. All right, let me see if I can get this out without cutting myself. Kevin did this for me the other day, and he didn't have any trouble at all.
Paul's asking, one of his corks says dime 5 and the other says dime 30, and he's wondering why that is. Michael?
There are different levels of cork. There are different textures of cork. There are different.
So it's texture.
Right. Yeah. So this is a...
We have 5, dime 5.
Okay. This is a polyurethane cap in here called a wad. And there are different wads.
Okay.
And when you screw it on, it makes a seal to keep the oxygen out. There are some now that have been developed by Stelvin for those that want a little air to enter. They have developed a wad that will allow a little air to enter. So this keeps the air out of the bottle. Now, we mentioned Australia and New Zealand are 100%, even with their reds. But they found over time.
Close to it, yeah.
Yeah,
No.
we're not there yet.
Yeah,
The jury is still out. Because how many people really store their wine? I read a statistic the other day, 80% of the wine purchased in this country is consumed within 2 weeks.
Yes. I think the average time that wine is from when it's purchased to when it's consumed, the average time in America is something like 8 hours or something.
Okay.
And it's because obviously the vast majority are the quick, just buy it and go.
The only thing quicker is probably a lotto ticket where the people scrape them off
Sure,
before they get in their car
Yeah.
to see if they've won. But yes, most wine. Now I have some wine that I've stored. I work here, so I can put. I have a cooler place, and I can put some wine aside and store it. But I've never. Unless I buy a library wine from here, I've stored wine for a couple of years, or I buy a real special bottle of wine. I'm trying to think who it was. ravines, I can mention them. They had an Argensinger, and I still have it. It's 7, 8 years old.
Okay.
Sammy Argensinger, that developed the vineyard, died. And so this was a really award-winning wine. But that's the only reason I kept it.
Sure.
And then I kept it for 4 or 5 years. And then I opened it at somebody's birthday, and we consumed it. But I normally don't keep a wine. And you probably don't either.
I do. I have a cellar that's keeps humidity in check. So I have some bottles that I'm hoping to store for a while. But any bottle that I've had, the oldest bottle of wine that I had, I bought recently that was stored somewhere else. So
Okay.
I'm fairly new to the storage game, and quarantine and this whole COVID situation isn't helping.
No,
because
you're breaking it
as
open.
we're continuing to drink through our cellar, we're
Yep.
getting closer and closer. But I'm still holding out on a couple bottles that they're from 2014. So I'm hoping that I can keep them for a little bit longer. But we'll see. We'll see how the willpower goes.
So these are our 2 basic closures. And, we research and we test, and other people test. They bottle wine with these, and they bottle wine with corks, the same thing, and they test. And the jury on the Stelvins, or the screw caps, is the wine taste consistently the same longer, where it doesn't with a cork. And cork seems to change. If you had 3 bottles of 3 bottles of a red, for example, and you open them all in a 2-year, they may all taste a little bit different for some strange reason. And 3 bottles with those closures taste very much the same.
Right.
So that's part of the process now, if you want your wine consistent. And that's what we're doing here.
And you can store these standing up.
Yes.
If you are hoping to hold on to them for a while. We talked about it before, I know, but cork, the whole reason Sideways is a phrase, and a great movie, which is another story, but you need to keep the cork, have contact with the wine, otherwise it dries out, and then you get way too much oxygen.
Yeah,
in there,
way, and then it's undrinkable.
Right.
Yes, it's undrinkable. There are levels with corks of a wine being corked, meaning it can be so bad that it tastes like your basement floor, but it can be not as bad, and it just doesn't taste great, and you may not buy it again.
Right.
Because, that wasn't as good as I had it in the tasting room, and it just tasted better there.
Right.
But I was at 55 wineries that day, and maybe I really don't remember, so I'm not buying that again.
Right.
And it's not the wines, it could be the corks.
Right. A lot of times it gets kind of flabby, it just loses the acidity, it just tastes like flat soda.
With our type of corks, we don't think a lot of that happens.
Right.
But when you have 100% cork that the inside has not been sterilized, that's the problem you run into, and we try to avoid that here. And we do avoid that here because we don't use that kind of cork. So, I spent some time with Kevin this week, and we talked about closures, and Kevin knows a lot of stuff for a young kid. Kevin is, you had Kevin and Jess on.
Yep.
And
that's right, to talk about rosé. Hopefully we can have them on again a little bit later on.
They both love the camera. I understand they want to do this every week.
Exactly, yeah. We're just booked solid, so we got to find... No, the winemakers always can be on whenever they want.
Yeah.
I'm curious for those watching though, if you're storing wine at home, or just a general consensus, how long do you usually wait? Is storing wine something you're interested in, or are you grabbing and going and twisting off right on the boat? It's going to become perfect weather. Now for that, I do have a question though, and I think one that is very important, that everyone's on the edge of their seat, from Rich. Any update on your book? Can you buy it on Amazon yet?
No, but it's really coming along. I'm not really technically savvy. I have 10 chapters done.
Okay.
10 chapters done. There are a few more. I want to have it in the gift shop by the fall. It's
good to set deadlines.
I'm working on the ice wine. What I've done is I've incorporated, I've written this book for all kinds of wine drinkers, I hope. You know, I've given it to a few people to read, and they come back pretty positively. I have my best friend in the world is a professional editor. So nothing has been edited yet. She doesn't want to read any of it yet because she's afraid that I'll go back and change some things, and she wants to get the whole flow. And she's a professional editor, and she's really good. She should be a writer, but she's a little stubborn. And anyway, so I'm going to get it professionally edited. So the grammar will be good.
That's good.
And then what I found from a young lady, I don't know if you're watching, Marjorie. Marjorie sent me a piece that she'd written on fairy gardens the other day, and it came in something. So I have 10 separate Word documents. So when I send this book to people, I have to go back and attach 10 times.
Each chapter is
yes, and then I have an appendices, where the research that I've done here over the years, I incorporate into the book. So if we're reading about noble rot,
right,
I'll mention it, but I won't spend all this time in my book, and I'll refer you to Appendix 6. So I've got 10 appendixes.
Okay.
And what I found yesterday with Google Documents is I can get the whole damn book on one thing with a web page address.
Yep.
And then I did it I'm still fooling with it, but and I guess it's part of the cloud. So
the ever-present cloud.
The cloud, and I guess that's how Amazon wants it.
Okay.
So what Amazon will do is they will set up and print my book. The whole setup is about $200. And then they set a price, $6, $7, $8 for a book, and I can order 1 or 1,000.
Sure.
And the gentleman, Michael from Ryan William and Chateau Lafayette Renault that wrote a book that gave me this idea, said that you get a book, you read it to see if you want to change anything, you change it, and then you can order 100, 200, 400 for that price. And it's always mine because it's in the cloud. It doesn't belong to, somebody's going to have to teach me what the cloud is someday. So I got it all, so if you want it, somebody wants it now.
The cloud is a lot like the Force. It just is. It's everywhere.
Okay. So at the end of each, so what I've done is I've incorporated my research of the wines, and my research of noble rot and wine acids and residual sugars and all the things that I've done over the years, and I put them together, and I'm almost done. And then I have to read it through, and I want to make sure it flows. And then at the end of each one of these chapters, I talk about what food goes with each wine, and I'm only doing Wagner wines. The book is, I work here, I don't know much about, I know a little bit about Sauvignon Blanc and Pinot Gris, but I don't pour that. So I'm just doing our wines, our vinifera wines. I don't drink the back page. It may be really good, but I don't drink the back page. So
I've been pleasantly surprised by some hybrid wines.
And I'm sure it's delicious, but I'm going to drink Wagner vinifera wines. So I'm very close to the end. At the end of each wine, I tell you what cheeses are good with it, what dishes are good with it. And as you know, I owned a restaurant and a catering business.
Right.
And I've incorporated my recipes, one recipe per wine, which will be at the end of each one.
Okay.
And what I just did recently is I have a really good friend, and we love lobster. And I paired sparkling with lobster.
Interesting.
And it's perfect with that. And I've gone through all the ways that you can cook lobster and the minutes and the poundage, and I've done that. And then I've done a lot of recipes. And then at the end of the book, they'll be after each wine, and then I put them together. So if you just want a little recipe book at the end of it, you could open that up and find those. So I've got that done. I'm pretty close to being done. I had someone that works with us, Emily, who's an artist, and I've given her my idea for a cover, and she's going to work on that now. And so what's his name?
Richard.
Richard.
Yes.
We're getting close, Richard. I hope.
He's also asked for a signature when he is able to
Well,
buy
you
it.
come
So
in and
sign
buy it.
copies.
If I'm here, if I'm still alive, I'd be happy. I'd be happy to sign it for you with a smile on my face.
Yes.
Okay.
Because today is better than any other day.
Today's the best day of my life.
Who could complain
I've
today?
never had a better day.
Well, a lot of people are very, very excited for this book.
Okay.
So that is great. Get any questions in that you might have now, because we are 1 minute from an hour. I mentioned it a couple times, but it is worth repeating for those who aren't in New York State. So New York State, our region, the Finger Lakes region, entered into phase 2 today. And what does that mean for us? Well, we are in phase 3, and there's 2 weeks between them, assuming nothing goes awry. So we're hoping that means June 12th, we're able to reopen for tastings. We are going to soon be releasing a little bit more detailed information in terms of what protocols we're putting into place to make sure that the experience is going to be safe for everyone, what changes you may see and you may experience, all of which are done in the name of safety, and all of which we feel are not going to intrude upon. If anything, they might even enhance your experience here. So
They haven't even set the guidelines yet. Do we know how many people we can have in here?
we do not have hard and fast
Yeah.
guidelines yet in terms of capacities or anything like that. We're operating kind of under, we think what we're putting into place are going to be fine.
I think I heard reservations may be necessary.
Correct. Yes. So that is one of those things that we're going to implement, and we'll make sure you have all the information ahead of time, so you know how and in what way you can make a reservation.
Groups are going to be limited for sure.
Groups are going to be limited, of course. If you do come in a larger group, there's a potential that you can just make 2 separate reservations, so you wouldn't all be able to taste together, but you would, still be able to come. One of the great things that we have so much space out back and outside, so that greatly grows the amount of people that we're going to be able to welcome in to do tastings, and then to also maybe you can still spend some time, after your tasting. It's not necessarily going to be a you're in, you're out type deal because of all the picnic tables, because of all the space that we have outside. So, like I said, we're going to have more information on that, on what you should expect. And then, as John mentioned, we do have to wait, of course, for what the actual guidelines are going to be from New York State. We anticipate we'll fall pretty much in line with those, but of course, we want to make sure, we're going about this the right way. So once that's set, we'll be able to start welcoming people back in for more than just picking up a bottle and heading out. And I can only imagine how excited John is to be able to pour again for people other than myself.
Yeah, I really enjoy what I do. I guess I'm going to have to start talking through a mask, and
yes.
I think we're going to have to wear a mask, and I think it'll be a while before we don't. I certainly don't want to get sick.
Right.
I'm 72 years old, and life expectancy is not great. But I want to pour wine. I want to pour this wine, and I'm a little out of practice. The Wagners have been very, very good to me during this time, and I've done a lot of writing, and I've created, I don't know if they'll use them, but a couple of new tasting menus. I've written some bios. I've been able to write on my book and done some research. I did some research. Well, for those of you that are in there's something I didn't know, and you as a visitor, I asked you, I did a section on microclimate and terroir is called, and part of the terroir in this region for years is we are in a region called the Banana Belt.
Yes.
And I was taught or told years ago that was a special little region that looked like a banana that started south of here and went over to Cuba Lake. Well, that's not the case at all. Google later banana belts. There are banana belts all over the country and all over the world. California, Oregon, South Dakota, Montana, Colorado, all have banana belts, and that's what they're called. And many are near mountains where the air comes down from the mountain, and as it comes down, it warms, and the area at the bottom of the mountain is warmer. We are a banana belt because we are at the deepest part of the lake. And as John has said almost every time that you've spoken to him, with these webinars, the prevailing northwest wind blows across the deepest part of the lake and keeps this section warmer. Well, a belt of land is a small section of land within a region, and banana refers to tropical. You think of banana, you think of tropical. So the name was coined years ago, banana belt. It has nothing to do with the shape. This is not unique to the Finger Lakes. There are banana belts all over the world. So I didn't know that until I did the research.
Each banana belt, you know, it's unique in its own way.
It is.
We're glad that we do fall in that parameter. But yeah, if you can find the actual shape, maybe it's a little bit more like a mango or a papaya, not necessarily banana, but you know, it is what it is. Real quick, I had just a couple questions, more on the housekeeping side, but GB asking if this information that we're kind of talking about here will be available on the website. It will definitely be available on the website. We actually have the first draft getting written right now, and we're hope that it'll be posted soon, so you get an idea of some of the baseline. Like I said, we can't finalize our protocol yet because we need to make sure that it'll fall with the guidelines from New York State. So we're hoping to hear those guidelines prior to June 12th, and then that way we can, you know, like I said, make sure that they're all set. If the way phase 2 opened up is any indication, we might not have a whole lot of time prior to actually reopening, but we're going to make sure we have that time and we get that posted. So at the very least, on our Facebook page, on our website, wagnervineyards.com, also Wagner Brewing for the Wagner Valley Brewing, and the Ginny Lee Cafe will have that information there posted so that you get an idea of generally what you can expect.
My understanding is that our customers will have to come in with a mask and then remove it for tasting and then put it back on again. It's my understanding.
Correct. Yes, we won't require you to taste through your mask.
No, but and the governor had an executive order yesterday that it said if you insist on coming in and not wearing a mask, then we do not have to serve you. We can ask you to leave, and that's been the case I've seen in a lot of businesses that they have posted, please wear a mask, and some people still have not.
Correct. Yes. What I would stress to anyone watching right now is, you know, understand the situation and that this is not just for your health, this is for the health of everyone here. So yes, we are going to require that you do wear a mask upon entry. That's the case right now, actually, with our sign that's out front. And if you do not want to wear a mask because you choose not to, you can wait in your car, you can call us, and you can do curbside pickup, and we're totally fine with that. But if to come into our building, yes, you need a mask.
Yeah, this virus is not over yet. It's not over yet, and the states that opened early, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but their numbers, you know, some of the southern states, the Virginia and the Carolinas and Alabama, their numbers I saw last night on Rachel Maddow, are like this now. So it's not over.
Yeah, no, we're
going to take every precaution that no one here gets sick.
Exactly. Yes. But overall, though, thrilled that we're still going to be able to do so in a way that allows people to come back in and, you know, be a part of Wagner Vineyards and Wagner Valley Brewing and the Ginny Lee. And, you know, I know a lot of people had trips to come out here, and hopefully you're still able to do that in some manner if you were able to postpone, or if it's just a little bit later on once we're able to be open, because, you know, we're going to love to have you back. There's no doubt about it. But
look at your Facebook page and keep checking the web page. And
exactly, Wagner Vineyards Facebook page. Obviously, it's where this video is, and I'm actually going to be putting together a video as well that showcases some of the changes that you're going to see, as well as some of the things that our staff is undergoing. You know, temperature checks, things like that. You know, just giving you guys more information, that transparency, so that you know, this is not a show that we're just putting on. We are taking it very seriously. So.
That it?
That is it.
We good?
Yep. I'm going to go up and hit end now. So any parting words?
No, just thank you. There'll probably be, you know, I've been here 3 times, and if we do something in the future, maybe, but let's hope we don't have another virus and we don't have to do this again. Thank you very much.